All right. So, Frank.
Yes, Frank.
This is my favorite movie of all time.
Mm-hmm.
I love this movie down to like every single frame.
Mm-hmm.
It's my perfect movie.
Sure. What's the premise?
Okay. So the main character, the main person that we follow and see from their perspective is John. He's a musician who lives in, I believe, England, London, somewhere around in that area. I don't remember the specific region. And there's a band that comes on tour through his town. You never really are sure how to pronounce their name, the Cernfurburns. And that's intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And so their keyboardist, this is all in the very beginning, so it's not really spoiling anything. It's just kind of setting it up a little bit. Their keyboardist runs into the ocean the night or the afternoon before their set, and John just happens to be walking by, and he's like, "Oh, you're the guys playing the show tonight," because he'd seen a poster, heard it on the radio, and they're like, "Yep," and he's like, "Oh, like who's that?" Or like, "What's going on here?" And he's like, "That's our keyboardist trying to kill himself," and he's like, "I play keyboard," and he looks at him, walks to the van, and he's like, "Oh no, I didn't mean to." Comes back and he says, "Be at the doors or we'll pick you up at 7:00, something like that."
Uh-huh.
And so then he goes and he plays a show with them, and then they invite him what he believes is like a weekend gig, and it ends up being they're recording an album. And so I'm not going to go too much further in like the storyline, but the characters are like you were saying in the last one, where they all have their own storylines.
Mm-hmm.
The main people it focuses on is John, Frank, who is the lead vocalist of the band and the main inspiration, driving force behind all their creativity.
Uh-huh.
And Maggie Gyllenhaal's character. Those are the three main characters,
Mm-hmm.
as well as, boy, I can't remember his name. But there's two other members of the band. There are 2 or 3 members of the band that aren't them, that I want to know more about them.
Yeah.
I want the movie to be 3 hours long.
Yeah.
And so the main guts that I get out of the movie is portrayed like through John and Frank, and that is the creativity in being able to come up with songs right then and love them and be so confident in them and happy in your ideas. And even though the people don't like his music,
Mm-hmm.
he loves it and he thinks it's amazing, and he wants people to like his music. It's not just making it to make noise,
Right.
and it's thoughtful about a little string from the carpet. And that's something that John would like in the beginning. That's like a struggle. You can tell that that's one of the first things they introduce you to, is he's coming up with a song in his head, and he's just like not sure. You can tell he's very like singing in his head, and he's just like, no, and then he goes and he writes it down, and he like starts, and then he stops because he's like, this is shit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a very relatable thing,
Mm-hmm.
I believe, for most creators. And what you strive to be is Frank, and every member of the band understands that there can only be one Frank, because like that's impossible. Like to actually like, but it's what I guess is that they're trying to say is it's not necessarily impossible.
Yeah.
And I want to say, just pay attention to the one of the first establishing scenes in John's neighborhood, and one of the final establishing scenes in another neighborhood. They're very similar.
Yes.
The neighborhoods are very similar. The same things happen. And so the entire time John's thinking, oh, it's because they went to the hospital because they need to be like watched over because they were a risk to themselves, or they had other ailments that like caused their pain that made the creativity come, and John just didn't have that badness to him. He didn't have that pain, is I think what he thought he was lacking, and or his muse in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But he was thinking of the muse in like it has to be like come from like your pain.
Yeah.
And it can, but as Frank showed, that's not what it always has to be. Like you can,
Yeah.
and so, and you find out later that like Frank was always Frank. He didn't like become Frank after something happened. And so that's kind of that was the biggest thing to me.
Yeah.
There's something I want to like talk to you about with I don't want to spoil.
Sure.
So I'll tell you
Frank
later.
is a great movie.
Yeah, please add to this.
Um,
Do you have? I know
So
you've seen it.
Frank is played brilliantly by Michael Fassbender.
Fantastic.
One thing you didn't mention is the entire movie he wears a huge paper mache head.
Mm-hmm.
And that's his whole. He built his whole persona into this character, Frank, and the whole band. Everyone thinks it's a gimmick. Everyone thinks that's the band, and like it's their show, their style, but that's the character. And there's like a whole storyline with that that's really interesting that I don't think gets enough attention throughout the entire story. But it's really good. It's worth watching.
I have a certificate. I have a certificate. I have a certificate.
It's really good. And if you're a fan of like music writing, this movie will speak to you too. Or if you just like to see how like bands create music or like find their creativity, this band will strike a chord, or this movie will strike a chord with you. No pun intended. But it's really good. It's definitely worth watching.
It's got so much silliness in it.
Yes.
But there's so many emotional, heart-wrenching scenes.
It's a roller coaster of a movie.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Every time I watch it, I find something new about it, and I'm like, I like it even more now. Like that's my firm recommendation for Frank.